Okay, everybody.
Okay. Um, Before we begin today, we would like to honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and the ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations. We would also like to acknowledge that Indigenous peoples are the original stewards of these lands. It is important that we remember the history of forest removal and genocide.
Hi, everyone. So today we have the honor of introducing Rick Williams, an elder with a long history of advocating for Indigenous peoples' rights and for American Indian students, not only here in so-called Denver, but across Turtle Island. He was the first American Indian student to earn a bachelor's degree at the University of Nebraska. Later, he earned a master's in education administration, and then he received an honorary doctorate of humane letters. He served as an instructor for the Indian Studies graduate program at the University of Denver for 4 years. Afterwards, he served as the president of the American Indian College Fund for 15 years. He currently sits on the board of directors for People of the Sacred Land. Recently, he uncovered 2 proclamations written by Colorado Territorial Governor John Evans in 1864. These proclamations called for invaders to kill and destroy Native people and incited the Sand Creek Massacre. With Rick's work, these violent proclamations were finally rescinded just last August. Easel is especially grateful to learn from Rick today because he is an important part of the community here in so-called Denver, where his work strives to make common knowledge of the true history of Colorado, specifically how these lands where many of us reside and where Easel is based were stolen from Indigenous peoples. His presentation today is titled The Iniquitous Fort Wise Treaty of 1861 and its Aftermath. So today, if you could please put your questions in the chat and then Rick can answer them at the end. We are recording, so if there's any content, Rick, that you prefer that we do not record, just let us know and we can stop the recording. And everyone, if you'll please join us in welcoming Rick Williams, and whenever you're ready to start, we'd love to hear from you.
Oh, midako yapi. Lelong betu ki lila washteo na Lakota imachapi tatanka hunhaska na mie oglala Lakota na shaela. I started with, can you guys hear me well? Okay. I started with greetings in Lakota, recognizing you as relatives. And I said my Lakota name is Tall Bull, Tatanka Hunhaska, and I'm Oglala Lakota in Cheyenne. The journey that I'm going to take you on today is started many years ago. And for me, it was renewed about 3 years ago when I decided to study the background of my great-great-great-grandfather, whose name was Whitehorse. And he was a Chicago, a Cheyenne dog soldier here in Colorado. And I never knew a lot about that history. And I started looking into that. And I ran across the Treaty of 1861 and I read it and I was shocked by the contents of it. It just didn't seem to fit well with any of the other treaties I'd read. But then I did a deeper dive into some stuff and I found the proclamations. Basically, the first one says, Governor Evans orders people orders a declaration of war against Indian people in Colorado. And he followed that up with 2 months later with a proclamation that allowed Colorado citizens to kill Indians and take their property. And these were both still active laws on the books of Colorado. And we managed to get them rescinded in August. And after that, we said, well, what are we going to do about the rest of this stuff? What are we going to do about this history? This, we're learning this stuff about what happened here. What should we do about that? And so we decided that we wanted to do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We just figured that was one of the things that could, that would really be good. Immediately, people like Glenn Morris and Don Ragona said, you can't call it reconciliation if there was never conciliation to begin with. And so we're working on a project called the Truth, Restoration, and Education Commission. But I really want to spend time to talk to you about the Treaty of 1861. And I found this word and I really thought it was appropriate for the treaty, Iniquitous 1861 treaty. And if you look at that, you look at all the, first it means that the treaty was grossly unfair and morally wrong. And it's all of that. But then when you go back down and you start digging deeper into this, almost every one of these synonyms could be applied at some point in the transactions that went on with the Treaty of 1861, its implementation and then aftermath. I mean, it was shocking, it was obscene, it was scandalous, it was reprehensible, it was unfair, it was dastardly, and it was crooked. And I'm going to share with you exactly why I say that. One of the things I always caution myself, because I never make a statement or say anything unless I can prove it. And I use a standard of 4 examples, 4 different perspectives in analyzing historical situations. So I try to find 4 different perspectives of the things that we're going to be doing. Can we have the next slide?
One second, I'll put it.
Okay, so what this next slide is we have to go back to 1834 to really begin to understand what was happening in the western part of the United States. And somewhere along the line, I stumble upon this act of Congress, and it's called the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act of 1834. And just take 1 minute and read that, because I think it's very important to the context of our discussion today. Then as you're reading this came out of the congressional records, and it's an official act, and people are bound by it. And I think the most important part of this was that the very last few words, it says, this act be taken and deemed to be Indian country. And they're talking about all of the land west of the Mississippi is entitled Indian land, which means they're conferring ownership and title to the land to Indian people. And if we were to go further into the act, there are provisions in there for removing people who are invading the land illegally. There's a $500 fine, and they were supposed to be removed. The only people who could come onto the land were traders who had a license to trade, or military personnel to build forts and roads through the territory. People could come through the territory, but they couldn't stay. And so I want you to kind of remember that as we move through this process, because this plays a very important role in how the land was dishonorably taken. You can take that slide off now. And if you would, can you show the Treaty of 1851 map? This one of the challenges of doing research like this is that it's oftentimes to find very good maps. I could not find a really good map that showed the actual boundaries of the Treaty of 1851 and the Treaty of 1861. So if you look at this map, in the background on the North Platte, all the way up in that corner, that goes up to Casper, Wyoming. And so the land, if you came down the Continental Divide in Colorado, all the way down to Forono Creek, and then back out across southern Colorado into Canada, Kansas, back up, back into Nebraska, to where the South Platte and the North Platte River meet. And one of the things that I'll be talking about in this is there's a delineation between upper Arkansas and lower Arkansas. And simply what that means is if you took a line and you drew it from where the North Platte River, right where the Platte sign is, and you drew it diagonally 45 degrees through Denver, through the center of Denver, out to the mountains, to the Continental Divide, the northern half would have been considered the upper Arkansas bands of Indians. The lower half below that would have been the southern Arkansas or lower Arkansas Indian people. So you can take that one back off now too. So when we get into the history of this treaty, we have to think about how treaties are made. Treaties are really, Congress creates a commission and they pick commissioners, and these commissioners go out and then they negotiate with Indian people and they develop a treaty. Well, the Treaty of 1861 was nothing like that. First of all, I have not been able to find evidence that Congress approved and appropriated, first of all, approved for a commissioner to come out and treat with the Cheyenne and Arapaho. I have found no evidence that that was approved, but anyway, at the time in 1861, a guy by the name of Alfred B. Greenwood was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And he sent word out to Indian country that he was coming out there and he wanted to meet with all of the Cheyenne and Arapaho bands. Now, mind you, there are a lot of different bands of Cheyenne and Arapaho, and they're not necessarily all going to be in one place at one time. So they could be spread out of this whole territory, all the way from Casper down to the southern Colorado border. So, you know, he's saying he wants people to come there because he wants to talk to them. And this is where he makes a mistake. He sends these runners out to the tribes, to the tribal bands, and he says to them, we want you to come in because we want to meet with you and we want to make sure we have peace with you, and we're going to ask you to give up some of your land. And that just immediately, people said, whoa, wait a minute. We want peace, but we don't want to give up our land. So when he brought all these people together, the Cheyennes had met, and the Cheyennes had decided that, so think about the governing body of the Cheyennes was the Council of 44. The Council of 44 was the most sophisticated governance model in the plains. And it was probably, from a context of how it governed people, it was probably second only to the Iroquois Confederacy. And so when they met, they called the council. So the council is constructed of, there's 10 bands of Cheyennes. So each band would have 4 representatives that would go to the Council of 44. So there's 40. And then the keeper of the sacred hat and the keeper of the sacred bundle and the person that was selected as the head chief of the Cheyennes made up the other. So that's 43. In a very unusual kind of situation, the Council of 44 would ask a member of another tribe to come in and be a part of their governing council. And I thought that's a unique aspect of Indian governance, that another tribe would be allowed to come in and help you govern your people. But it was a very sophisticated way of making decisions. So when this decision came, it was discussed in the Council of 44. but also the structure of governance has societies that operate the basic duties of the people. So you would have people that the military societies, when the camp moved, there were people that were, so all of these people were given an opportunity to discuss this and come back to the Council of 44. And they voted and they said, no, we're not going to attend. We're not going to go down there. We're not going to participate. And they said, we want peace, but we're not willing to give up any of our land. And so they decided not to attend this thing. And as I move through this thing, I think, how did this all come to be? Well, so the guy Greenwood, the commissioner who was setting this all up, realized that this was going to be a failure. So he kind of bails on the whole thing and goes back to Washington, D.C. And he leaves this guy by the name of, his name's Dr. F.B. Culver. He's left in charge to try to make this happen. And he just, he had no clue. He was really almost like a glorified storekeeper, because his duties were to watch over the trinkets and the annuities that they were coming out and make sure nobody stole anything. And somehow he gets conned into the rest of this. So he, and right at that same time, the guy who'd been the Indian agent for years was a guy by the name of William Bent. He was married to a Cheyenne woman, and he really understood the people and knew the people well. And so, but he saw what was going on and he just got disgusted and he quit. So any chance of having a reasonable representation from the sides of Indian people, in particular the Cheyennes, kind of went out the door when he quit. Now, an interesting fact about, one of the things that we see consistently through this is collusion, nepotism, conspiracies, fraud, and one of the fraud occurs real shortly after the treaty it was negotiated and supposedly signed. This guy named this Culver guy, he goes back to Washington, D.C., and he files a claim in the Bureau of Indian Affairs for $5,000, saying that he was misled and that he had to do all this other stuff after the commissioner left. And they let the guy have the $5,000. That was a lot of money back then. That would be like getting, $500,000 to do this. And I suspect that, and again, this is a suspicion, not an accusation. He threatened to spill the beans and said, you guys are going to have to pay me off to keep me quiet. That's the kind of stuff that was going on behind the scenes. So comes time for the treaty to actually happen. And even though the Cheyennes say they're not participating, other bands come in, because there was also, because of the Treaty of 1851, the government was required to distribute annuities every year. And so they timed this at the same time that this was going to happen. So people had come in and they were getting their annuities. And at that time, the governor, the territorial governor was a guy by the name of Gilpin. And he didn't like what was going on. So because he knew this Culver was supposed to be representing the Indians, he went and appointed another guy to represent the Southern group. Supposedly, that's the way it was understood. And his name was Boone. He was a nephew of Daniel Boone. And with Bent leaving, this guy is the only one that has any kind of experience working with Indians. So he comes in, and the day that they're all gathering, and he sits down with them, and because he can't speak the language, he talks to the interpreters, and he says, well, who's gonna actually sign this treaty? And the interpreters are kind of ham-hawing around, and he said, well, why don't you just pick somebody? And so he went through and he picked 6 people. This is in Bent's book, he talks about that. He talks that Boone actually picked 6 of the leaders that were going to sign the treaty. Somehow, and for some reason, 2 of the Cheyenne peace chiefs come. They weren't supposed to come to this meeting, but they show up anyway. And then one other guy was assigned. So there were only nine people signing. Now, of the 2 Cheyenne peace chiefs who reportedly signed this document, 2 years later, both of them stated they never signed the treaty. They never agreed to the treaty. So that was pretty suspicious. That's when we start getting into the details. So, you know, I sit down and I'm starting to read the articles of this treaty, and I'm reading through it. And, you know, later on, I get a copy of a book. It's called Chief Left Hand by Margaret Cole. And she talks about how the interpreter, so you have a Cheyenne interpreter, and then you have an Arapaho interpreter. And the Arapaho interpreter was a guy by the name of John Smith. Sometimes they called him Blackfoot Smith, and sometimes they called him Lying John Smith. So Lying John Smith is the interpreter for the Arapahoes for this treaty, right? You know, so he's the guy that's going to be interpreting. You know, and when I believe you guys got a copy of the treaties, you can see how erudite that treaty, that was a very sophisticated treaty, probably one of the more difficult treaties to read and understand. So the Arapaho interpreter can't speak the language. He has, you know, testimony 2 years later in the commission, on the Indian Commission report. He's asked about, you know, his ability to speak Arapaho, and he says, I can't speak Arapaho. And yet, you know, and yet they had this guy as being the representative. You know, it just, that stuff, when you see something like that, you know something is absolutely wrong. If this was a legal contract and it found its way into the court system, it would have been thrown out immediately because of something like that. But however, because this treaty was iniquitous, it never did, that never happened. And I'm going to talk about some other things within the treaty. You know, if the average person of that day would have read that treaty, they would have had trouble recognizing very much in that treaty. But one of the things that we recognize, that I recognize, and found evidence of, is that treaty was never put together with negotiations on a part of Indians. That they brought that treaty to this meeting without any consultation from tribes prior to. So there's no prior consent. There's no prior discussions whatsoever. They just put this paper out and want these people to sign. And the reason that I know it was prepared in advance is there's a couple of articles, and if you read Article 6, it required that all of the people, so because none of these people show up, they have to put an article in there to try to cover up. So it says all of the people who didn't sign and should have been there to sign, or they wanted there to sign, had a year to come in and put their signature on a piece of paper, or at the very last sentence of the article, it says they would not realize the benefits of the treaty. Let me see, I've got I wanted the specific language. Shall not be entitled to benefit any of its stipulations, or the whole treaty. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, here I am. I decide that I want peace, but I don't want to give up my land. And what the provision meant was that by giving up all this land, by giving up this 53 million acres of land, all these people were going to be moved down into the very corner of Colorado to a very small area. Indian people knew this area well. It would dry up in the summertime. There would be no water. Buffalo generally stayed away from the area and would never be in the area. So the people knew this was a horrible place to go. And then they're saying, you know, to realize the benefits of the treaty. There was no benefits for Indian people. This was just a big ripoff. But they make it sound like it was in the treaty. They make it sound like it was very desirable. So, you know, you look at that and in your copy of your treaty, mysteriously, Article 11's missing. What was in Article 11? Why would something be taken out? And I managed to track it down, and the only way I ever found it, and then I found several other sources, but I was looking for treaties, and attached to a treaty of Argentina was this treaty of 1861. And in there, the Article 11 was still intact. And so that's how I found out what it contained. Remember I said there was conspiracy. This is evidenced by, in Article 11, the cities of Denver and the surrounding cities, and that was meant to meet Fort Morgan, Colorado Springs, and other cities in Colorado were going to be allowed to buy the land that they currently occupied for $1.25 an acre. Okay, so let's go back for a minute and go back to my very first comments about 1834, about occupation of the land. None of those people were supposed to be there. There wasn't supposed to be a town at Denver. There wasn't supposed to be any of those towns. They were not supposed to be there. Everybody there was illegally occupying the territory at that time in 1861. Even the Treaty of 1851 reaffirmed that nobody but tribe, you know, the tribe and traders and the military could be on that land. And yet the land is being overwhelmed with people. So you wonder how did that come to be? How did these people just completely ignore this law? And I'll get to that more later on. The article was actually taken out by the Senate when this treaty was ratified, and the ratification by the Senate went very well, and I'll tell you later on exactly why it went well. But in addition to the interesting part about Article 11 and the land that Denver was on was, and again, I haven't found, I've got some ideas about what happened, and I haven't been able to prove it yet. We're tracking down some correspondence with the congressional representatives of Colorado during these Senate conferences. And we believe what happened was somebody said, why should we have to buy this land? It's Indian land, it's free. And so not long after this treaty, the cities of the Colorado cities get land grants to give them the land free. And so, you know, we've got evidence of, we're looking at titles, doing some title searches on how those transactions took place, and if there's any correspondence about that in again, you know. So one of the things that I say, and I say it very safely and explicitly, is the city of Denver has culpability in land theft in regards to Indians. It's clear. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the evidence is there. And that would go for any of the cities along the Front Range. So they carry a level of culpability that has never even been suggested before my presentation. I've never seen it anywhere else that anybody suggested that perhaps, the city of Denver or any of those would have had culpability. I'm going to jump back to 1859. One of the reasons why we have this major conflict going on in Colorado was because of gold. Gold was discovered in 1859, and within the first year, 100,000 people had come to Colorado. And these are the rogues and the roughnecks of the world, miners, and they come rushing in here for gold, and they're trying to exploit every opportunity they can to get gold. Well, remember, they're all here illegally, and when you have that many people coming into a territory, they're killing the buffalo, they're destroying, polluting the water, they're doing all of these things that are alienating Indian people. And Indian people keep saying, well, they're not supposed to be here. And the Indian agents are ignoring them, and they keep raising that question. And so that's why, we get into these situations about, later on when we talk about the number of people who were here illegally. I think it's important. Now I'm going to jump back to the treaty again. There were certain parts of the treaty that were removed and modified, and I think that when you look at the original treaty language, there was some. Kept looking at this, and I must have looked at it 100 times before I realized that there was something wrong. And what it is if you look at the treaty, the title of the treaty is a treaty between the Confederacy of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. And I'm thinking, a Confederacy of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. There was never such a thing. That didn't exist. They were never Confederates. There were two different nations that interacted with each other on a regular basis, especially during hunting season with buffalo. They intermarried, they exchanged, but there was never anything that would indicate that these two nations were Confederates. So I kept wondering, why would this be an introductory statement in this legal document? I concluded a couple of things. One of them was that we were just at the beginning of the Civil War, and the states in the South were called the Confederate States. And I believe that the reason why that shows the word Confederacy shows up in this document is because this document, this treaty was weak, and it's a wonder it should have never passed the Senate. And I'm wondering if they just didn't try to make it exaggerated a little bit by using the word Confederacy. I don't know for sure, but it really it struck me as being suspicious. The other reference is that in this treaty, they reference both the Upper Arkansas River tribes bands and the Lower Arkansas River bands, and I think that's important because that was sort of defined in the 1851 treaty, but not explicit, and it makes a big difference about how you read this treaty and how you interpret it. Well, okay, so lo and behold, that this treaty goes to Congress, the Senate looks at it, they finally approve it, they send it on to President Lincoln. Okay. Remember, Lincoln was from Illinois, right? Guess who else was from Illinois? Governor Evans. They were partners in business transactions prior to President Lincoln becoming president. So any kind of, you clearly there was, collusion on the parts of the president and Evans. In fact, President Lincoln is quoted as saying, I have trouble with this treaty, but we'll deal with Indian reform after the war. So when you think about the broader context of the history during that period of time, the greatest amount of fraud in Indian country and Indian affairs was happening at that time. The corruption of Grant's administration and Lincoln's administration can't be exaggerated. And in fact, in 1872, Congress met and had a special session on Indian fraud. I'm going to show. I want to show this to you. Very rare find. This is an interesting book. It's about 1,000 pages long, contains all of the fraud that was going on in Indian country during this period of time. And one of the best things that I found about that particular book is oftentimes when I would talk about these kinds of things, people would say, well, you can't hold people back then accountable to today's standards. And that's BS, because they knew what they were doing wrong, and they were trying to confront it in 1872. You spend 1,000 pages arguing about how much fraud there was in Indian country. They knew it was there, and they knew they were corrupt, and they knew they were doing this, and they failed to do anything about it. So, we mentioned the illegal occupation, and when Indian people kept saying, we didn't sign. Finally, one of the Indian agents asked for a federal investigation. Now, this is 1863. And at the same time, they're asking for the investigation. The tribe, the Governor Evans and people are out trying to get the signatures needed for Article 6. Remember, people had to sign that in order to validate that treaty. And so they were trying, and during this period of time, I can only find one record of one person signing, and they reported that when he signed, he was drunk. And so you have thousands of people who they're supposed to get signed this document authorizing the release of this land, and they come up with one signature. So the United States government sends a district attorney out to evaluate what's going on. The district attorney comes out and he's looking across the things, reads the documents, looks at the treaty, and for the first time in this whole process, somebody has a conscience, and he does the right thing. First of all, he sends a letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, who's now Dole. His name is Dole. Somehow he's related to the Indian agent in Colorado. I think it's his cousin or something like that. And so the district attorney sends this to Dole and says exactly what land was ceded in the Treaty of 1861. And the Indian Commissioner realized he's being set up, so he refuses to respond. Absent that response, the district attorney writes his own opinion. And he says, he basically says, all of the land north of the South Platte. Remember on the map where the South Platte runs right through the middle of Denver and then goes out kind of at 45-degree angle northeast until it gets to North Platte, Nebraska. And then anything north, all of that land was never ceded. Means Indian people never gave it up. That was what the district attorney's opinion, legal opinion was, that went back to Washington. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs, though, affirms that and sends it back. And when he sends it to Governor Evans says, this ain't going to happen. You're going to start the worst Indian war that you've ever seen, worst ever. And so they don't know what to do. You know, you have this opinion. So clearly, Governor Evans gets with Lincoln, and Lincoln directs the Indian Commission to change the ruling. And he comes back with a ruling that says, oh, we made a mistake. We misinterpreted this, but all of this land north of the South Platte was really ceded. And they use this real vague argument about, you know, that Indian land was held in ownership of everybody, and and that these 9 people could have given consent even though, the other tribes had said no. So he sends that, but he leaves the door open, and the last sentence of his interpretation of this or revision of this says, but you still have to get the signatures. And that never happened. That was the one thing that had to happen in this treaty for this treaty to be valid, was those signatures needed to be gotten. So it just, Evans is kind of backed into a wall now. He's back, he's got now by this time, a lot of the miners have left, and the gold mines are not producing like they thought they would. And he's up against the wall. He's got 45,000 people living in the Denver area. And he has this opinion that says, they're there illegally and that he needs to get these signatures. And he's tried to get these signatures and it's failed every time. Every time he's tried to get signatures, he's failed to get anything. And so he changes his tactics. And that's where you get the first proclamation. He uses an excuse that Indian people are raiding out on the plains and causing havoc with the citizens of Colorado. And he issues the proclamation and he declares war on all Indian people. It didn't make any difference. He didn't distinguish between Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Comanche, Pawnee. It didn't make any difference. It was all Indians that he declared war. Well, constitutionally, that's illegal, right? I mean, you can't have governors declaring war against other sovereign nations. It doesn't work that way. So it was highly illegal, but nobody said anything. No, there was nobody said, you can't do that. That's illegal. Where was the protection and of the government in this process? Where was it? How are we supposed to get a fair shake? And when it wasn't successful, when Indian people scattered, the very same time this is going on, there's a very, very high level military action against Indian people in the Plains region. We're doing an incident report that shows just in this very short period of time, there were 60 attacks by military on Indian camps where property was destroyed and people were killed. And we believe that one of the reasons that was happening was the military would come in and attack, disappear, and then Indians would seek retaliation against somebody. And the nearest place would be settlers that lived around them. And so there was this constant, reaction to the military attacking and retaliation. And then again, that would escalate. And so, again, Evans does this his whole thing's not working. In fact, it's falling apart in front of him because, he's campaigning to be the first governor of Colorado, and this thing has fallen apart on him. And people are unhappy. And during the first vote of who would be the governor, it wasn't him. And so he has to get more aggressive. And he issues the second proclamation saying, okay, all you citizens in Colorado, you have an obligation to kill Indians and take their property. Excuse me, I'm going to make it clarified. Kill hostile Indians and take their property. And there was some discussion about what hostile meant. And if you made any indication that you were going to argue or disobey a Colorado citizen, you could be killed. That was considered hostile. This manifests itself in a lot more ways than a lot of people really ever understood. One of the things that happened was, and I've got two sides of this. I wish I had more. I wish I had a government record of it, but I've got an oral story and then I've got a written version of this. And what happened was, the allegation is that the Colorado state government got arsenic and distributed it among the settlers. And when people would come in, Indian people were starving at that time because the buffalo had been run out. Pretty tragic for them. So when they would come in, they would lace their food with arsenic. And that's how they were killing Indians. I think that if you think about it from the Cheyenne, from our people's standpoint, we were in bad shape. We were being pressed by the military. We were being poisoned. We were desolate. Starving. And so we actually asked Governor Evans if we could come in and renegotiate the treaty. And he refuses. He knows he's winning. He refuses. And he says, no. He said, I'm not going to renegotiate with you. Said, you all of you have to report to that reservation, and that 61, that little small desolate reservation. You have to go down there. And if you go down there, if you all go down there and you're residing down there, I'll begin a conversation with you about, calling the heat off. And so in November, about 3 months after the proclamation, tribes are don't know what to do. So they're told to go to Sand Creek. And so different bands of the people go to Sand Creek, and Shivington, of course, comes in there on a pre-planned effort for a massacre. Governor Evans is supporting this, and they raise troops. They raise Colorado troops to do it, and you end up with the Sand Creek massacre. Women and children being killed, brutalized. And it effectively ends the presence of Cheyenne and Arapaho people in Colorado. They're exiled from the state. You know, that was one of the questions that I asked myself when I started this project. Why are there no Indian reservations on the Front Range of Colorado and on the Eastern Plains? We have some of the most beautiful, productive land in the world, and yet there are no reservations. Why? And you answer that question with one answer: genocide. Sorry about that. Cheyenne and Arapaho people leave. In the case of the Northern Cheyenne, they're in exile for 20 years. They have no place to go. They're moving around the Northern Plains, you know, still engaged in conflict with the United States. And it wasn't until after Custer's defeat in 1876 and the aftermath of that the Cheyenne surrender at Fort Robinson, and they were relocated, the Northern Cheyennes were relocated to Oklahoma, to the Cheyenne Arapaho reservation down there. They didn't like it there, so they escaped from there, and in an effort to go home, they made it as far as Fort Robinson, Nebraska. They were captured again, and there was they said that they would rather die than go back to Oklahoma, and they tried to escape again, and almost half of the band that was left of the people were killed at Fort Robinson. The remnants of that band and Little Wolf, who was hiding in the sandhills, were finally given clemency and a place to live in 1884, 20 years after the Sand Creek Massacre. So these people had lived and exiled in their own land for 20 years. So we think it's all, you know, we think that's the end of it, right? You know, I mean, it can't get any worse. You're put on the reservation, you're giving up 50.
Folks, we seem to be having some technical difficulties. Mr. Williams, can you hear us at all? Jesse, can you hear me? Okay. Looks like he's signing off. He'll probably try to sign in. We're all, you know, at this point, we know how to play with Zoom.
I just emailed him, asking if he can rejoin. I think we could probably pause the recording until he's back.
Okay, good idea.
About 50. And they came out with a ruling that yes, the land was stolen, was taken illegally, and that to settle the claim, they were going to pay the tribes $15 million. And $15 million meant that the tribes were going to be settling for 30 cents an acre. Now, hardly fair market value for the land that was taken. But in addition to this, if you think about how the Indian Claims Commission worked, you have the federal government hiring attorneys to represent Indians, and then you have the federal attorneys representing the government, and then they sit down and they negotiate these settlements. And in this particular case, the dishonorable dealings continue in the Indian Claims Commission. There's no accommodation for the loss of the primary economic resource that the tribe had, and that would have been buffalo. There's no compensation for the loss of the buffalo. There's no compensation for water rights. There's no compensation for oil and gas, but there was a consideration for gold. And it's interesting, but what really makes me skeptical about this is that they use the time of the taking. So the way this works is that if they can prove that there was an illegal activity, then they go back and they pick a year for the time of the clock starts on damages. So they pick 1865, but remember, we go back to the Treaty of 1851. Our people were here and occupying this land since 51. So why did they pick 65? Well, I was doing more research into the gold mining in Colorado, and it turns out that by 1865, most of the gold, most valuable gold, is gone, and mining claims go from $1,000 an acre to just $1 an acre. And even if you're filing any more claims. So clearly, these attorneys knew that by starting the clock in 1865, that the damages would be considerably different than if they did it, 15 years prior. That made a big difference in the settlement. That's how they ended up with 15 million. In addition to that, the other part about this case was that anytime you have a treaty violation and it's proven to be the claim is settled on behalf of the Indians, there's supposed to be 5% compounding interest on the action. So anything that was taken in 1865 onward should have had that claim should have had a 5% compounding interest, which would have made it a significantly larger amount of money in 1964. But you know what they said? We don't have enough money. We don't have enough money to pay these Indians for this land that's taken, that we illegally took from them, cheated them, and we're cheating them again, and we're not even going to give them what's rightly due them. And so, you see this time and time and time again. And then another thing that's really important that comes out of this particular era with the Indian Claims Commission is that nowhere else in the judicial system will you see a situation where a person or a group of people have their land stolen, and they take it to court, and they find out that it was stolen, and it's given back to them, right? I've looked high and low in all of the cases that I could find, and that's always been the case. The land is always returned, except with Indians. Not a single case that came before the Indian Claims Commission, and I think there were like 364, did Indians get an acre of land back. Now that's why we don't have any land. That's why we don't have the resources that we should have. That whether you go back to the Treaty of 1861 or whether you look at the Indian Claims Commission stuff, it's just everything was worked people. So where do we go? Where do we go from here? You know, it appears that, in my opinion, that if we were going to try to seek some kind of legal remedy for this land theft, which is provable, that we you know, any other place or that you would expect some kind of relief, except in jurisprudence doctrines for that affect Indians. And what I mean by that is that there are certain legal doctrines that have been constructed specifically to reduce the opportunities for Indians to file litigation against the United States government. One of those is a doctrine called laches. Estoppel has a lot to do with it. Plenary power, the government saying that they can basically do whatever they want to. There's a judicial precedence for that. Res judicata, that once if you've ever filed a case for something, you can't go back and file it again, file for the same issues. Statute of limitations, and the failure to waive sovereign immunity have really all kept Indian people from having justice perfected in America. One of the worst cases, I think, that come to mind in regards to this example of the perfect example of failed justice. So the descendants of the Sand Creek Massacre filed a reparations claim against the United States government. And this was in 2012. In a decision in 2015, the United States District Court dismissed the case for failure to waive sovereign immunity. Simply, they dismissed the case because the plaintiffs, the tribe, did not get permission to sue the United States government, which is kind of an absurdity when you think about, on one side, you have the United States government that is the trustee, having trust responsibility and oversight of our lands. I can't sell my land on the reservation unless I get permission from the government. Okay, that's what the trust relationship means. I can't farm my land unless I get permission from the superintendent on the reservation. We don't, we really don't own our land on the reservation. It's held in trust by the federal government. So you have, on one wing of the American Eagle, you've got trust responsibilities. And then on the other wing, in the judicial branch, you have unlimited power and significant doctrine restrictions that keep Indian people from using the legal system in a way that would best serve them. And so for Indian people, the American Eagle doesn't fly very well. It's not a good system. So we can't expect to go into the courts and say, let's fix this. Let's sue and see if we can get remedy. We're not going to get it. That's just, it's kind of like what they say. You can get away with murder if it's an Indian who's killed. We know that we have lots of examples of that with the murdered and missing Indigenous women. So what's left for us? What is left that we could possibly do that could find a way to so one of the things that we did, our group, remember I mentioned we started a Truth, Restoration, and Education commission. And we did this because we know the chances of legal remedy are minimal at best. But we also know that people don't know what happened. How many of you know why? How many of you heard this story before? Any of you? Have you ever heard? You've never heard why there were no Indians in the Eastern Plains?
Not this story specifically, but I remember there was I believe, I forgot which speaker it was, but we had another lawyer, I forgot which nation he was from, but he was telling us a very similar thing. There was something to do with Queen Elizabeth's treaty way before. Same thing though, very, very corrupt, not allowing for any real negotiation. Before the treaty was even made, there was a quote from her about the plan to treat natives in a sense that there would be no way for them to, basically no way for them to even have a chance in a actual court of law. Because like you've been saying, I mean, it's either they fight back or they try to play in a completely rigged game that is just it's unwinnable basically. But I'd never heard this story before. I heard of similar corruption stories, but not like this.
So what we're going to try to do is, because if we can't find a legal remedy, the most important thing that we can do is bring the story to the attention of the general public and use media and to help us try to find a way to get some resolution to this issue. And so that's why we created this. We're doing a couple of things with with the Restoration Commission. One of them is that we're definitely going to tell the truth. And it isn't going to be just the truth about the eastern half of the state, because the same thing happened in the western half of the state. When they got done in the east, they went to the west and they did this to the Utes, almost identical. And so we're looking at statewide, doing a complete analysis of every one of the tribes, the treaties, who signed the treaties, telling the truth about what happened in these negotiations, what happened in this. And we'll submit this stuff to the commission, and the commission will evaluate it. And we hopefully whatever recommendations they come out might be listened to by the general public. For sure, one of them would be, I know that the commission is going to come out with a recommendation on resolving the case of the defendants, the Sand Creek descendants case. There's no reason why that should have never been settled one way or the other, either judicially or with some kind of congressional act. But those are the kinds of things that you can expect to be coming out of the commission when we finalize it. Some of the other things that we're doing, and I think that these are important, is if you've been exiled from your land. So let's just talk about the Cheyenne and Arapaho, where we're sitting at right now. It depends on, I guess, maybe it depends on your interpretation of which side of the Platte River you're on. If you're in the south part of that land may not have been taken. But if you're north of the Platte River, that land was definitely illegally taken. So if you're sitting north of the North Platte, what are some of the remedies that you might think about that are going to be palatable to people? And one of them is we want to try to find ways to bring our people back, but at the same time, we don't want to be displacing any individual landowners, or our people went through that. We don't want to cause problems, but at the same time, there's resources out there that perhaps we could be utilizing. So one of the ideas is, why don't we create an American Indian embassy in Denver and start bringing these people, their representatives, back to the state to interact with the state of Colorado. And the state of Colorado was very culpable in this, and there's never been a lawsuit against them ever for damages that they caused. There's never been, but maybe through public opinion we can encourage the state of Colorado through some type of legislative action to begin, providing opportunities and resources for these people to come back to their homeland. I mean, you think about something like Ukraine, those poor people over there, you can imagine how they're suffering in this horrific, aggression by Russia. Well, you know what? That's what happened to our people. exactly the same thing, minus the tanks and missiles. You know, so every time I see the news, I just kind of cringe because I know that's what was happening to my relatives, and it makes me sad. You know, and what makes it even sadder is we can't even come back to our homeland. We've been exiled from our own homeland for 157 years. You know, so at some point we want to try to find amenable ways for our people to come back, and we think by creating an embassy here, and then begin discussing co-management of federal land bases like the Arkansas National Grassland, co-managing that with the federal government to create opportunities for our people to come back, and introducing maybe a buffalo herd in that area, and doing some sensible kinds of things that are not going to harm the environment. But this is all going to be this will all be decided by public opinion. You know, we know that that's the way we're going to have to try to go. So at some point, and because it's Colorado tax laws, the Tabor bill really limits our ability to do stuff. I put together a proposal that I thought was going to be a real winner. And what it called for was a $50 fee on every closing cost on a real estate transaction. And there's 400,000 real estate transactions in Colorado every year. It would have generated about $20 million for us to begin trying to find ways to bring our people back to the state. Unfortunately, it was thrown out because it was not deemed a fee, it was deemed a tax, and we would have had to go through a statewide referendum to get it in the budget. And we don't have $2 million to do that. If we did, if we did, I would be going for it. So, you know, there's things like that. There's provisions that we could do that with, and it's almost. And I wanted to share one more thing with you. When I was looking at all of this stuff, one of the arguments why people felt almost obligated to come to Colorado and settle and take Indian land with no repercussions was something called manifest destiny. You guys hear of manifest destiny before? It's a God-given right to kill Indians and take their land. You know, and so I started looking at that, and I thought, you know, there's something wrong with this. You know, God, our creator, put us on this land to take care of the land. That's one, you know, that's our first law, is that, like you guys are trying to do, our law says that it's our responsibility to take care of the land. That's why we were put on it. And that's why we tried to have a symbiotic relationship with the land. And then you have the settlers, the invaders coming in, and they are under the impression that God told them that they could come here and kill us and take our property, and there would be no repercussions. And then I thought about that, and I thought, wait a minute. God would never have said that. God would never have done that. You know, God gave these settlers their instructions, and they're called the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's property. Those were the instructions. And so somewhere along the line, man, not God, made this decision to do this to our people. And you know, I have to call that one out, because it's God didn't do it. Let's open it up for questions. This is a good time for questions.
Okay, Bryce, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I just had a quick question, Mr. Williams, about you mentioned nepotism within these really depressing array of conspiracies and other fraudulent crimes that the United States government did against the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. Do you know any of the family names of the like the nepotism that was being done? Like any of the, like, were they like specifically like I guess like senators and other governors like kind of family, or was it more of like a corporation style family like Rockefellers and Morgans and so on and so forth?
So the things that get mentioned are usually political appointments. So like Commissioner Dole basically gave his nephew the job to be the Indian agent in Colorado. Just real quick, the other interesting kind of thing that goes on here is that you have the territorial governor who's also automatically assumes the role of Indian agent within the state. So you have they're supposed to be acting in the best interest of Indian people, but they never do. In the case with Boone, the first Indian agent, he was a relative of I don't remember off the top of my head, but you see this throughout this whole process that you know there were political appointees where there were relatives. Good question, though.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Williams, this was very informative. Thank you very much. I have a question if there's been any movement by the commission to seek incorporating some of this into public school curriculum in the state of Colorado. I myself was born and raised in the Denver area and didn't really know what happened at Sand Creek until I was well into my 30s. So in terms of swaying public opinion, is there any effort to try and get that incorporated into public school curriculum?
Yes, as part of we call it the TREC Commission, Truth, Restoration, and Education. And one of the efforts will be working with the school districts on having a broader picture of what happened with Indian history, telling the truth, telling the stories about what happened, including recommending, curriculum that should be taught. But also, what the biggest challenge we have with that is that how do you change the narrative? The narrative has to be changed in order for us to really have accomplished what we need to do. Is we need to have schools and school districts telling the truth. When you pick up a book, the first time I pick up a book and I see Colorado settlers, I know that book is biased. There's a term that I coined called the cognitive alien perspective. And when I pick up a book and I see settlers, hostiles, those kinds of words, I know that this thing was produced by somebody who wasn't given an opportunity to provide a clear perspective about what happened. It's always biased. That what they say about the winners write the history. And until we begin to reconcile those kinds of things within the curriculums, it's difficult. It's very difficult to talk about the original inhabitants of Colorado were illegal immigrants. You'll never see that how do we change those kinds of things? How do we change the identifiers of Native people as being hostile, savages? When you look deep into the history, those things are they're misrepresented, and those are the kinds of things that we also have to try to work. It has to go both ways. We can tell the story about an Indian perspective, and we can do it in the curriculum, but there needs to be some honesty on the other side, telling it, that these people were not settlers. They were invading a territory. They weren't supposed to be there. They were illegal. And that was the biggest cause why we lost our land. So yes, education, both at all levels, and maybe at the adult level, is probably just as important. I think, we need to have more seminars about, in higher education, especially about reflecting the accuracy of multiple perspectives and lenses in historical presentations.
Thank you.
Good question.
Brady's got his hand up there. It looks like he's going to be typing a question in the chat.
Okay. Let's see. I don't see a question in the chat.
I believe Brady is still typing. He's getting ready to click.
Oh, there it is. Oh, okay. Can you go into some detail on rename efforts and challenges that you face? Yes, I can. I've been also involved in renaming Mount Evans. I'm a kind of like an ex officio advisor to the U.S. Forest Service and Clear County and a number of other places about how we go about changing names. And I'm glad we're moving in that direction. And I'm glad we also have a directive from the Department of Interior to remove insensitive names, derogatory names, and it's in some cases it's gone very easily, and it's been a very productive process. The renaming of S Creek went really well. We're hoping to have a similar kind of outcome with Mount Evans. And the other part of this too is kind of a combination. Is last year we were working on the mascot issue, and we're starting to see the results of that becoming a reality this spring. And that's probably one that I just saw on Channel 7 that there's some issues going on with that. So though, there's a bunch of us that are working on these things, trying to get make the changes happen. Come on, you guys, this is your chance to ask those questions. Don't be afraid. Any question you always wanted to ask, but was afraid to ask about Indians, I'll take it on.
Cynthia's got a hand raised there.
Now, I was wondering what kind of documents or documentation you would use to show Article 11. What two documents would you hold side by side to present those changes? And then also when the Cheyenne were being poisoned and they went back to Evans to try to renegotiate the treaty, what kind of documentation is there available to show that? Because that's what they need to see to believe that it happened. I'm wondering what's the process that entails.
Okay, so specifically, let's deal with the poisoning issue. Anybody who would hear that would be skeptical, and I was skeptical at first. And so the first source I documented was with Bill Tallbull, and his great grandfather was killed at Summit Springs, and he talked about oral traditions about that happening, and that when they went into Tallbull's camp after they were killed, they found 2 pounds of arsenic, and he had told people that he was taking the arsenic to an Indian agent by the name of Thomas Twist in the Dakotas in the north, who was more friendly to Indians, to document that this was going on when their camp was annihilated and massacred. Fortunately, this shows up in a textbook of an interview with interviews of other people that it happened. It's pretty broad knowledge that Evans refused to talk to Indians when they tried to come back before, after he'd issued all of those during those proclamations. It's documented in a number of different books, so that one's pretty easy. What was the other one?
The documents to show that Article 11 was removed. Which ones would you hold side by side to show that? And I also wanted to ask about the book that you displayed on your screen that showed the Indian fraud. What was the title and author of that book?
Okay, so let's see. Let me get the Indian fraud stuff. So this is actually the House report from Congress. This is a congressional report from 1872. And let's see, what was the other one?
Article 11.
Oh, okay. Article 11 is pretty easy because I have a copy of the treaty that was attached to the Argentine treaty, and then I've got the copy that comes out in Kapler's treaties. And in that book, Chief Left Hand, she documents it in there. She was one of the first ones to document and actually explain. So there's quite a bit of evidence that article was taken out. Now, what we're missing is, what is the background behind this? Where's the documents that allowed the federal government to give that land to the cities? We know that there was a land grant for the city of Denver. And the only reason we know that is one of our researchers' ancestors had a land grant, probably from one of the settlement acts, and it's referenced in there that the land that was owned by. So somebody along the way said, hey, this land's no longer, it's owned by the government now, you can have it. I think even broader is when you start looking at the land grants for your sister institution up the road, CSU. You talk about a mess. I mean, they're sitting on $350 million of land or money from land grants that was taken from this property. They still have 19,000 acres of land, and it's producing $5 million in revenue in oil and gas. And they have not done a good job of recruiting Indian kids or helping out, and then the other one is the railroads. The railroads were, and that's part of Evans' scheme, was to get the land for the railroads. Again, it's all kind of all tied together. Thank you. Good questions. Make me work.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, right?
Awesome, cool. All right, I got it working. So I moved here like 2 years ago from Texas, and like the native history here is something that gets brought up, but just vaguely and isn't really dove in on. And I was wondering if there's any books or any literature that like really kind of gives a comprehensive history of, say, like the atrocities that went on here on native land. I just, I transferred here from DU, and that whole situation with DU being on native land and them having the pioneers and stuff. It's just like, it seems like there's a lot of history here, but not a lot of places talk about it. And up until recently, until Denver Art Museum did their Native American exhibit, there wasn't even like a depiction of it, or people even talking about it, or you don't meet a lot of native speakers, out in the open that are just like, yes, this is our land and this is what's going on. It tends to be glossed over.
So So this is my thoughts about that. So immediately after Sand Creek, Evans and Shivington are shown in a poor light, but somehow that's restored very quickly, and everything going forward becomes a positive thing. Indian removal from Colorado becomes a positive thing, and there's not a lot written about it. There's almost this absence of this because I don't know if it's guilt or being disgraced about what happened, but you don't see any writing. And then all of a sudden in 1964, you see a bunch of authors that start beginning to delve into this. One of them was Unruh. He did the article that I sent you guys, Prelude to Indian War. That article really explains in great detail exactly what was going on. But that's the first article that shows any sympathy towards an Indian perspective in 100 years. And so you don't have, even the people who are writing about Sand Creek don't provide the background history on the treaties that led to Sand Creek. And so there's just an absence of material out there. And until I stumbled on Margaret Cole's book, Chief Left Hand, there was nothing out there that you could read without, you had to go really into some deep dives, old Colorado magazines, to find information. And then you begin to find the clues. I found a book that talks about some of the stuff that went on here that was out of print for 80 years. And had I not found another real old book that referenced this book, I would have never found that information about the treaty. So I think that, you really have to do a lot of deep dives, and from 64 on, it seemed like, again, I can't say it was a cover up, but there's just this absence of it. And yet, when if you study history, you'll see that California had a horrible history with Indians. Colorado's comparable. Colorado's right up there, and you don't even hear about it anywhere. There's no better word than genocide that accurately describes it. And when I talk about the treaty, all of those synonyms all show up in the discussions that are going on and the interactions. One of the things I didn't talk about was how they destroyed the buffalo. We've got a really good dynamic digital screen that shows from the eastern coast to the western coast how the buffalo were destroyed. And the largest buffalo herds were still in Colorado at the end, just before they were destroyed, were here in Colorado. One of the things I forgot to mention is that we're doing a historical economic loss assessment as part of our truth and reconciliation. So we're going to put dollar figures on the losses of all of those things. Everything that I talked about, there's 8 sections that we are doing historical economic loss assessments of.
Thank you, Rick.
Very good. Would anybody else like to pose a question to Mr. Williams before? Cynthia has raised her hand. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Yeah, we went to the Colorado history and we looked at some maps. And one of the things that we noticed was through the years as we looked at maps, you could see that the maps had Cheyenne and Arapaho reservation or land on the maps, but there was nothing about the Ute on any of the maps. You couldn't see, we only found one, I think, that showed where the Ute were located. Do you have any idea why that may have been the case? What may have been just the maps that we were seeing, or is there actually something else to that?
It most likely was that for whatever reason, they were focusing on the eastern half of Colorado, because there's a real distinction between what goes on in the east and what goes on in the west. And the west is almost all, with the exception of a few of the Shoshones, the land cessions in Western Colorado were all Utes. And there are lots of books out there, like The Utes Must Go, The History of the Northern Utes. There's some excellent resources that you can pull up. And I think The History of the Northern Utes has the best maps that shows the land cessions and shows their occupation. But there are good resources out there, but there should be more. Again, as part of the curriculum for that part of the state, we should be studying those. The maps in the eastern part, there's fewer maps regarding the eastern part of the state than there is for the western part of the state. Nobody's ever done a true history of the Cheyenne and Arapaho of Colorado. It's just not there.
Thank you.
Maybe one of you younger people can pick that up and take that on as for your dissertation project when you start working on your PhD. Because that's the kind of stuff that that we need. Well, we will have laid the groundwork for you, but there still needs to be lots more investigations. I want to first of all, I want to thank you guys for inviting me to talk. I'm going to share this with you because a lot of my work that I've been doing in the last 3 years has been guided by messages and dreams and from ancestors. And sometimes, in when you get in academia and you try to explain those kinds of things, that a lot, they're not accepted widely. They're not, they're not accepted as being something that's relevant within the realms of academia. And so, and the work that you guys are doing in regards to Mother Earth is absolutely critical. And the reason that I'm telling you that is that I had a vision, and the spirits talked to me about the land. And they said that if we didn't start doing something soon, that bad things were going to happen. And I believe that COVID is an example of that. But even more specifically, later I had another dream, and the spirits came back to me, and they told me there's going to be a drought, and this drought's going to be devastating. And so we're already in it. We're already seeing the impact of it. And what we have to do, we don't have a lot of time. We've got like 20 years that we got to get this thing figured out. We got to turn it around. Trump was the worst thing that could happen to our policies in regards to saving Mother Earth and saving. We've got to change our behavior. We've got to do something different. And you know what? I'm going to own this, because we had an opportunity to do something about it in the 1970s, the late 60s and the 70s. There was a movement in America where people, they called them hippies and they called them everything, but there was this consciousness that was going around, and we faced an energy crisis, and we knew what we were supposed to do. And you know what? We got comfortable. We got jobs. We got sucked up into society. We got sucked up into capitalism. We got sucked up into thinking everything was going to be all right, and we didn't do anything. Can you imagine if 50 years ago we would have started the initiatives that you guys are going to be working on? 50 years ago. So, you know, I and my generation share part of the blame for what's going on. And I just give you all the encouragement I can to you know, do what you can and help Mother Earth heal. Because you know what? This is the reality. It's not Mother Earth I worry about. It's humanity. It's us. We're that invasive species that's causing this problem, and she's going to get rid of us. She has that power, and we got to recognize that. We got to find ways to live in a symbiotic relationship with her every day, every way. And I know you guys know that, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So that's I'm 70 years old, and I've been doing this kind of stuff all of my life, but I've never seen it reach the level of urgency that it is now. And that's not a doomsday message. That's a message of hope, because I know that we have the ability to create that symbiotic relationship with the earth and with each other. We have to do that. That's part of our responsibility. And I see it happening, and there's a real reason why it's happening. Our ancestors, when Europeans first came to this land, they talked about, these people coming, and they said that they wouldn't understand us, and they wouldn't know how to live in this world, and they wouldn't have any ownership to the land. But after 7 generations, and they're not talking about the colonization version of generations, our generations is 70 years, 72 years. Everybody that you would know in your lifetime, your great-grandparents to your great-grandchildren, is one generation. They said after 7 generations, the people who come here, their blood and their bones are going to make up the genetic material that's in the earth. The plants they eat, the water that they consume, the genetics of those are going to help them develop ownership to this land like we have as autochthonous people. And so I think that's why I have hope, is because this next generation of people who are coming up have that responsibility we have of taking care of Mother Earth as their first law. And I just want to share that with you in a good way. Thank you. Oh, Palami Ayalo.
I'd like to ask all of you to join me in thanking our speaker. Don't go away, because Cynthia's about to post the link. In fact, there it is. But Mr. Williams, thank you very much. A round of applause isn't quite the same on Zoom, but we mean it just as much as we do in person. So folks, if you could take a few minutes to complete the feedback survey, that would be enormously helpful. Our next meeting is going to be on in May. And, oh golly, I got to look up the exact date, but it's the first Friday in May. That's Friday, May 6th, and we're going to be meeting on campus that day. And what we're planning to work on is our ESOL portfolios to create, organize, and present our contributions to environmental stewardship of Indigenous lands. So we'll be sending out details through email and probably also through our various social media outlets and our Canvas site to keep you all up to speed with that. So that's the Friday before exam week. We'll gather together for one final in-person meeting. I also wanted to welcome our two new students, Micah Rogers, who's doing a Master of Science in Environmental Sciences, and Brady Graber, who's doing a Bachelor's in Geography and Environmental Sciences. So, hey, welcome to the group. It's very nice to have you here and great to have you participating. Okay, so I think with that, when you're finished with, oh, and there's the email. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams.
There was one more thing, David.
Oh, there is one more thing.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, on Monday, there will be another annual survey for ESOL students to fill out. It's an email you'll get on Monday, and you do get a gift card for filling it out. I believe it's $10 for either Target or Amazon. So be on the lookout for that on Monday.
Okay, and that's for students. I don't get the $10.
No, it's just for ESOL students.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
Fine.
I learned a lot today. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Really appreciate your words. Thanks.
Thank you guys, and you guys be safe and take it to heart. We got to start doing stuff collectively. Oh, the Daco Chunko Wash Day in a good way. We go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
you.